Hall of Famer Bill O'Donnell stopped by the Harness Racing Museum and Hall of Fame following the 2022 Hambletonian. He sat down with Mark Loewe to discuss his incredible career and fondest memories.
It's Hambletonian weekend 2022, and we are honored to be joined by William Bill O'Donnell. Bill was inducted into the Harness Racing Hall of Fame in 1991. A native of Nova Scotia, Bill dominated the Money One list from 1981 through 1988, winning the title 4 times and finishing second 4 times. In 1985, Bill became the first driver to earn over $10 million in purses. Bill, welcome.
Thank you, Mark. It's good to be here.
So, Bill, according to USDA, you had over 37,000 starts, over 5,000 wins. You win the money 15,000 times. Career earners over $98 million. 13 Breeders' Crowns, 2 Little Brown Jugs, 1 Hambletonian. Not bad for a kid from Nova Scotia.
No, absolutely not. No.
So, why are there so many good horsemen coming out of Nova Scotia and the Maritimes?
Hungry. Do it for a living. It was either a coal mine or race horses when I was a kid. I came from a coal mine in town. And my dad had horses. He was a full-time horseman, couldn't make a living at it once he had a family and married my mom, whose brother was a very good driver trainer, and it was just part of life, growing up and feeding horses and mucking their stalls and stuff.
So that's how you got started in the business, basically, with the family.
Yeah.
Now, when did you decide to leave Canada and head to the States?
I had been I was in Ontario in 1965, like summertime between school. Went back home, came back to Ontario, worked for Bill Welch for a couple of years. Went back home, I was working for Eric Webby in the Webby stables, and just a complete coincidence. Bill Doherty, Jim's brother, was in the next barn to us at Webby's farm, and I went over for something, and the phone rang, and Bill was going on the track. Mo, they call him, and he said, "Answer that, Bill." So I answered, and I said, "It was Jimmy." And he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm working at Webby's." He said, "I got a spot here that one of my guys just left, went back to New Brunswick. You want to go to work?" So that's how I went to work for Jimmy.
So you mentioned a couple of names there, Wellwood and Jimmy. Growing up, were they the mentors in your life, or your dad?
My uncle and my dad, yeah, were the two guys. My dad, he like I said, he did it part time, and he trained 3 or 4 horses on the side, and I would go after school, clean up, whatever was left to do at the barn, and he worked nights in the coal mine. God bless him, and that's kind of how we get started. I'd help him a little in the summer, and my grandmother ran the track kitchen at Sackville Downs. Yeah, so my uncle, that's where he raced, so I would go stay with them for the summer, and my uncle was a great teacher. He just let me do whatever I want. Not let me do. It was easy for him. He had lots of time to spend with his family because I would do his job and he would pay me, and it worked out good. So
growing up in those times, who were the horses that helped you perfect your skills?
Back in those days, the horses that we had, like one of my uncle's horses, my dad had a horse called Clarny Boy, was a good horse, and he had 4 or 5 horses for Mr. Jabley in North Sydney, and I was never around him much, but he had a mare called Graham Miss Volo. She was the first one he ever let me sit behind in a bike, and I remember she was getting ready to race. It was her last big training mile before it raced, no qualifiers back in those days, so I said, "How much you want to go?" He said, "Go as much as you can go." So I went a mile, 2:11 with her, but she only had a record of 13 or 14. So I come back in, and my dad said, "How much you go?" I said, 2:11. He goes, "Where'd you stop that watch?" Those old guys, like halfway through the stretch, and there's an old guy there, Joe Hood. He said, No, he said, "I had him even 10 and 4, he said. So anyway, that was, say, Saturday. She races the following Saturday. My dad drove her. She got beaten 2:13. So he took a lot of ribbon. The next morning, Sunday morning at the fairgrounds, they were going, "Henny, you better get that kid his colors," he said. So I was 14, but the horses that I was around that were good horses were Watchtop, Port Wallace Boy, Fedorn, Miss Fury, Deanna Dell, horses that my uncle trained, and then later on Pace Fast Pick when I worked for Archie McNeil, and then I worked for Archie when he was training LeBlanc's horses, and that was one of the colts that were there, and he set a maritime record, and then That was a year. Then Mr. LeBlanc died. And that was the end of my job there. I went to work for Eric Webby and ended up going to
Ontario.
I was just grooming horses. Like that was just kind of a summertime thing, right? And then I went to work for Jimmy, and then he let me drive and got me a job with the Greys. And Traveling Boy actually was the horse. I mean, that was the horse that got me going. He was a free-for-aller for many years around New England. Was horse of the year a couple of years, and I won a couple of big races with him. And he'd have done a whole lot better if he had a real driver, I'm sure, because he taught me a lot more than I ever taught him.
So your first stop in the States was in New England, correct?
Yeah, Rockingham Park. Yeah.
Rockingham. And why there? Because of Jimmy?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, you know, who else in that Rockingham era were the horsemen that, you know, kind of helped you along your way?
Ted Wing, you know, I was friends with Ted. We were the same age, and I just kind of got along good with him. And then I had a couple horses on my own. I worked for Jim, but I had a couple horses on my own. And Teddy drove them most of the time, and that was kind of a big help. And Bucky Day, I mean, you can Wally Ross, Billy Foucher, Leroy Copeland. There was a lot of big names. Earl Beatty, Ken Heaney came over there from New York and with the single shaft sulky.
Right.
And he just dominated as soon as he got there, but he would have anyway without the single shaft sulky. He was a very, very good, talented driver.
He came, I believe, he spent a lot of time in the Monticello area.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
And so when you were in Rockingham, did you have a small stable? Did you train?
After I went to work for Mrs. Gray, Ivy B. Gray, she was from North Conway, and they had 7 horses, but I was their private trainer for 6 years. And we had anywhere from 4 to 12 horses, depending on how your year went the year before. So we'd buy some young horses and stuff. And then I got driving more and more, and people wanted me to take horses, so I opened a public stable and stayed around New England for another year or so, and then moved to Saratoga. And then I went over there with 15 horses, and ended up I had like 50 in 2 years. And then I had an opportunity to go to the Meadowlands, and I sold everything. I sold 20-some horses that I owned all or a piece of, and took my grand amount of $40-some thousand and went to the Meadowlands and had a partner, Jack Rollins, and we claimed a couple horses, and we got lucky.
So how long did you go before you decided to stop training and just concentrate on driving?
Probably 3 years. I think probably 1983. I got rid of the stable when I moved to Meadowlands in '80. It just got it was too, you know, a lot of people say, "Why'd you give up your stable?" I said, "Because I didn't need it anymore. I could make enough money catch driving."
Right. So your first year at the Meadowlands was 1980.
'80, yeah.
And who did you find? What trainers helped you along with getting more of your catch drives in the early part of the Meadowlands?
Early, I think Lofty Bruce, that hired me and fired me 100 times over a period of 20 years.
You weren't the only one.
No, exactly. But it's a big wheel; it just goes round and round. And then Jerry Silverman came, and I was driving quite a bit. And then Jerry came with computer Camp David, and he sent 3 of them out here, and one was a foreign horse, and he owned him. He sold him to Bob Benkel, and then he took those horses back to California that year, and then he came the next year with many more, and then he went to Florida, and he went from those 2 horses to, well, you worked for 100 horses maybe, right?
Yeah.
So that was a big push. Like I was Jerry's guy, kind of. And then.
Did you know him prior to him coming?
No.
Did you know him in California at all?
No. He just called through Charlie Carp, which Charlie through Susan Layden, who owned most of those horses. And,
Sue Boughton.
Sue Boughton. Yeah. And she owned Camp David, and she owned Computer. And I only ever met her once. She came out here for the Meadowlands Pace when he was a 3-year-old, when Computer was a 3-year-old. No, I never knew Jerry at all. I met him when he came here. I talked to him on the phone, so.
He had the gift of gab.
Yeah, he had a gift of a lot of things, Jerry. He had a great eye for a horse. He was the first guy I ever saw that stuck to families exclusively. If he had a horse, good or bad. I mean, if you go, no, I don't like that family. Yeah, I like that family. And it worked for him for many years.
Yeah.
Even right up to a few years ago. I mean, he had champions in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, in 2010.
You know, he had, Romeo Hanover was 1966.
Yeah.
And then he had that good mare, was a Glowing Report, I think, that won the Jugette in 2000.
2008 or 9 or 10 or something like that.
No, Jerry was quite a character, and I was fortunate as well to work for him for a year. And as you said, that was the year that he was going to Pompano, and the stable had gotten so big that they ended up building a barn at Pompano Park just for him, with 80 stalls, because we had 80. Yeah. So we broke all the yearlings at the Red Mile. Yeah. Because the barn wasn't ready until Thanksgiving Day.
Really?
But but he was quite a character, and that was Hit Parade, Peach Bottom, My Melissa, and all those good horses that he had. That he had a good friend in New Zealand that was always finding him good horses in New Zealand. Bob McCardle. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and he'd buy those things and bring them over here when I worked for Jimmy. And he would buy. He had a lot of foreign horses, but Jim's theory was bring them over, give them a whole month off. Don't matter how long they had before that, until they get over their sicknesses, which they never did, but they always got sick, and train them back. Jerry would bring them over here and race them 3 weeks later, and it never changed what good or bad. I mean, I'm thinking all this time, what the heck were we doing? Like, saving for 4 months. Jerry bring them over, give them a week off, jog them a few times, put them in the bike, train them, qualify them, away they go. And he had some good foreign horses too.
Yeah, for sure.
Good luck with it.
So we've already jumped from New England to Saratoga to the Meadowlands. So, what were there any owners at the Meadowlands that you can say really impacted your drives? Or was it mostly just the trainers that you dealt with?
And mostly trainers, I think. I mean, well, I knew the owners through the trainers. Yeah, it was mostly the trainers. I guess. I mean, they were the ones that would enter the horses and name you on them, right? Where it came from, who knows? But.
Right. So let's talk about some of the other trainers that were at the Meadowlands. Obviously, your relationship with Jimmy Doherty was special, and Teddy Wing, and those go back a long time. So what about Ray Remen? Ray.
The ultimate professional, Ray. I mean, I've known Ray since I came here to the Meadowlands, and he was. There's some people, and I'm not one of them, that could run IBM. He's one of those guys that he has good help. He has faith in his help, and they don't micromanage. They don't oversee too much, like can bother people. And Larry was, maybe that was Larry's job as his brother, but they were both the same. I mean, they had good help, and they knew who was a good groom, bad groom, good trainer, bad trainer, and great guy, and great relationship with owners. And he was very good, Ray. Very, very, very personable guy. Very personable guy. Very knowledgeable. Very talented, and great horseman.
You mentioned Lofty Bruce. What about Lofty?
Lofty Bruce was a little bit of a curmudgeon, I guess you could call him. But he was a good horseman. Very, very, really underrated. He worked for some great guys. He worked for Joe O'Brien. He worked for Stanley Dancer. According to him, he never worked for anybody but Stanley. Stanley was his real mentor and his idol. But a great horseman, that guy. Very, very good. Very good. And bought cheap horses and did really good with them. And I think he did good with about every horse he ever got. So, very good.
Well, now in the driving colony, obviously there was 8 years where you and John just totally dominated. So, what kind of relationship did you have with John Campbell when you were driving? Was it adversarial? Were you more on a friendship, and you guys just knew that you had a job to do?
That's basically what it was. We were friends. We traveled together. He said, John's my older son, Chris's godfather. But once you turn behind the gate, no more friends, no more. I mean, you get lost. Oh, I let John go, or John let me go. Well, we were driving to two of the better horses, right? It wasn't like I'd say to him, if you want a hole, come on in. No, there was none of that stuff.
Right.
But no, we would. Once the gate started moving, it was game on. There was no, and we're professionals, I think, right? There's no, Hervé Filion, who was one of the greatest trainer drivers and horsemen that ever lived, and he'd hear a couple guys argue, and he'd go, "Come here, guys." He'd go over to the program and go, "Here's what you do. Turn a page. Let's go back out and do this again." He never was one to argue or this stuff. He just part of life.
I remember watching. I was in the driver's room with Hervé, and I believe it was the Meadowlands Pace had just completed 1 year, and Hervé didn't do any good, and majority of the drivers who were in the race were all standing at watching the replay, and to your point, Hervé just said, "Turn the page."
Yeah.
I can't change the outcome of that one, so I might as well go on to the next one.
Yeah.
So
I'd like to drive that one over. You said, "I'd like to drive that one over." Yeah.
So other drivers on the racetrack, who did you find I guess maybe the toughest to drive against, or the ones who had just as much skill, or maybe not the best horses at the Meadowlands?
There was a lot of guys that never really got what they, the accolades they really deserved there, that would come in and they'd get frustrated and they would leave. Like, well, I remember the first night I come down to race, when I had a stable there, I sent my uncle down and he was working for me. I think we sent 5 horses down, so I come down to race them, and it was pretty intimidating. I mean, I'm come from New England, in Saratoga, and now I'm at the big time. So my uncle said, here's what you got to do, a couple of things. He said, just take them all back and let them finish. This ain't Saratoga. You're not going to push anybody around here. So he said, and pick one guy to follow, to watch drive here that is a good driver. Just then, Greg Wright was walking by, and he goes, that's the guy. And he was a good driver. There's a guy there that, he's Hall of Fame material, like in our country, like in Canada. How he's been overlooked for many years, I have no idea. He was leading trainer here for the first couple of years, Greg Wright, right? Came from Canada with a bunch of racehorses and was leading trainer. And well respected among everybody. All the big owners, the Grants, the Del Millers, and they all sent horses to Greg Wright. And he was very, very good at what he did. Very good. One of the best ones. And there was, I can name a lot. Cat, Manzi, Walter Paisley was in here one time and did good and got frustrated and went home, right? And there was a great driver, very, very, very good. And there were so many of them.
What about Benny Webster?
Oh, Benny was Benny. I mean, Benny could make a horse go as good as anybody. And we always said at the quarter pole, Benny's either on the front by the 5/8 or he's on the run. He'd have them going so fast along that backstretch, and he could make a horse. He could not only make a horse go fast, he could carry them to a long ways. Once they got the front, it seemed like they never stopped. They just keep going. Great hands, great set of hands, light guy, very good, and a good horseman too. Very good trainer.
Michael Chance.
Mike, he was in a league by himself too. Mike, he was very, very good. Mike LeChance, I trained horses, John trained horses, Benny had a stable. Mike LeChance is not only a good driver, he's one of the best horsemen that I've ever been around, without a doubt. With when he drove for Durfine, I mean, and they did great together for years and years. And then all of a sudden, Ronnie didn't have as big a stable, and they said he lost a lot of his owners. They said, well, the worst thing that ever happened to Ronnie is Michael Chance stopped driving, without a doubt, because he was extra special too, with trotters, pacers, quiet about it, and would just made a lot of sense on what he did. Very, very good horseman.
No, it was definitely, the Meadowlands was the cream of the cream. There's no question about that. So, all right, we talked about people. Let's talk about horses.
Yeah.
I got a list of them. So tell me when to stop.
Yeah.
Valley Victory.
Great horse. Never really got to show his potential because he got sick and he never raced after the Yonkers trot. I don't know how good he was. I mean, as far as a racehorse, people always ask you. I remember Pat Waldo, who picked him out for the trials when they bought him and stuff, and he won there one night, and he came from last, and he just circled the whole field, and he won easy, and he never had his earplugs out his whole life. He had pulled, his ears plugged to keep him quiet, and come back to Winter Circle, and Pat said, just how good is he, Bill? I said, all I can tell you is, Pat, he's better than those 11 he raced against here right now, but he never had his earplugs out. I never even took the whip off my shoulder with him, and he won every start. Right? I mean, he wasn't very big, but what a powerhouse of a horse! What a powerhouse! And and I raced practice in Mac LaBelle and horses like that too.
Right.
Mac young. I mean, I'm not saying he's better than Mac LaBelle by any stretch of imagination, but he was a good horse.
Yep. You just mentioned one that was kind of a handful of practice.
He was a little stubborn sometimes. He didn't like to get started too good, but once you got him started, he was good. But when we went out to Ducoin with him for the Trotting Derby, and he won the first heat, and he wasn't crazy about going 2 heats either. He wasn't crazy about going 1 some days, but anyway, we were going to go to the second heat, and there was a big field, and there was a guy who was trailing. He was a local guy. He put his horse in there, and he knew he didn't belong, but just wanted to race in the Trotting Derby because he was a local guy. And my horse stopped. Tina, Paris wife, she was running him, and when I went out there first, we used to get the marshal to get him started, like to go to the gate. Well, out there, there's a bunch of girls. I said, wouldn't grab him and just get him started. Oh, we're not allowed to touch the horse. I went, oh my God. now I'm in trouble. So Tina, come on, got to run with him. Tina couldn't get him going. I said, Tina, don't let him go, don't let him go. And he stops. Here, this guy comes from behind me, runs over me. It broke his wheel, so now he has to go back to his wheel fixed and stuff. And so I said to Tina, take him up and put him right on the gate. So he took him up and stood him there. And sure enough, away he goes, and he won the Trot and Derby. So the guy, he comes back in, he goes, oh, I'm really sorry. I said, listen, do me a favor. You go over to the tack shop and you get yourself a brand new pair of wheels and send me the bill. I said, he goes, no, it was my fault. It doesn't matter. They were leaving me. We'd had to go on 3 heats. I'd had to go back and go with it.
Now he was your one Hambletonian winner.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And he was quite a handful that day, if I remember.
Well, he used, I don't know what he stopped at later in his life, but as soon as you would ask him, he'd go right to the right, like he wanted to pull up, like, but he'd keep going, but he'd start bearing out. And he stopped that later on. He got sound, or maybe, I don't know why, but anyway, he got better. But you could, he won the week before the Beacon Course Trot, and it was a rainstorm, and I just rode first up the whole way, but never said a word to him, and he was straight as an arrow. So the next week I asked him, and he tried to pull up. But they used to, I don't think he did much road work, kind of. They had a power cart and made him walk all the time with pressure on the cart. And I always thought, well, maybe he just likes that, right? He'd rather do that than do what I'm going to make him do, right? So,
Interesting. What about Delinquent Account? Great pace and
great mare. I raced her. John Copus had her as a 2-year-old. And we were a free state, and he couldn't get there for some reason, storms or something, whatnot. And I raced her down there for him, and she won the stake, whatever it was. What a nice big mare. But she was a big mare. And then, just for her to get around turns was tough for her. And she was young, and then when George Siegel bought her as a 3 coming 4, I think John told me the story that he was training her back. She'd had some lameness problems a couple times, and so they bought her for a broodmare, and John told George that she's sounder now than she's ever been. So they were just going to buy her and breed her. So they said, well, we'll try her. And she went on to be, the 8th mare of the year, but really nice mare. And a great broodmare. I mean,
yeah.
Fancy Crown. She was a good mare too. She raced against the Colts a few times. She beat them. She won the Futurity. I raced her, the first time I raced her was, I think, in the Hambletonian Oaks. She won the Hambletonian Oaks, and then she just kept getting better and better all that year. She was a good mare. Very good mare. Took a little spell, like a lot of them do out west. It's so hot.
Okay, Bill, we just talked about Fancy Crown. Let's talk about horse that another trainer I think you'd say was one of the best, horse called Troublemaker, and Gene Regal.
Absolutely, yeah. Gene Regal, look at the success he had over the years from way back in the 50s till he's like Jerry right up until he retired from training. Had great horses year after year after year after year, and bought them as yearlings, picked them out and trained them, and very good. And Troublemaker, I raced him, I think, once as a 2-year-old, twice as a 3-year-old, and I was racing a horse called Guts, who was he wasn't staked to a whole lot, but he was a good horse and much better on a mile track than he was a smaller track, and where most of the races were on the small track. And Buddy Gilmore drove him at the Prix d'Eté in Montreal, and he got locked in, finished 5th, didn't make the final. So afterwards, he just said, listen, he said, that horse is going to the Dancer next week. He said, and I got rode, he's in a lot of them. He's not in that one, but he's in everything else. He said that, they're looking for a driver. So I said, yeah, I'll drive him. So in the Dancer anyway, Guts wasn't eligible, neither was on the road. And he won there. Then I raced him the rest of the year, and he won the Messenger, I think, and then he won the Breeders' Crown. And then they retired him after that, so I just got a chance to race him a little bit in the fall.
What about Napolitano and March of Dimes Trot? You remember that race?
March of Dimes.
Wasn't that the one at Garden State that Mac was in? I think Napolitano was in.
Yeah.
And
there was
Rossi was in there.
Rossi, yeah. Sugar Cane Hanover won.
Yeah.
That was without a doubt the best race I ever seen in my life. But those two horses, even though they finished 2nd and 3rd, they went the best races. I mean, they just went head and head a whole mile. And what made Sugar Cane Hanover a winner was that Rossi moved 3 deep just past a quarter. And Sugar Cane, he was done. He was stuck first up. He probably couldn't have done what he did that first up. he let Rossi go around and give himself a perfect trip, and he never moved him till 100 feet from the wire, and he just got by them.
Mm-hmm.
But those other two horses, that was something to watch. I mean, just going head and head like that, and finish second and third.
Mark Loewe, I know you had an opportunity to drive him early in his career.
Yeah, I drove him the first 7 or 8 starts, and he was green. He was really green. He was a little hard to operate too, and he started, but he got over all that. He grew up in the Peter Houghton Memorial here at Meadowlands. That's the only major race I've never won at the Meadowlands was the Peter Houghton. But I raced Mac and Sir Taurus, and they both won their eliminations. And at that time, Sir Taurus was better, I thought. And I took him, and then John took Mac, and he was second. And then, he drove him the rest of his life pretty much, yeah.
The Camtastic horse.
He, a great moneymaker, and a very handy little horse, right? But could only do one thing. He couldn't do two, he could do one. You could leave and sit, or you could do whatever you wanted after that. But he had one good move to him, and he was quick, and it was racing him. It was so hard not to leave with him because he was so quick at the gate. But I know if you did that time after time, it would be a detriment to him, I thought. So, but he went on. He made a lot of money. It was handy. And funny story about Camtastic, when Bob Bonney was running the farm, Dream Air Farm, and I had a colt down there, and I went down to see a colt, and they're all in the field, and we're out in the field, and this Camtastic is there, and he's got 4 white feet and a white nose and a white eye, and I said to Bob, and he's following you around, he's kind of being playful, he thinks you're one of the colts, and he's biting, and he's rearing up, and he's trying to get on your back, and so I said to Bob, what is that? He goes, I'm embarrassed to tell you. He said it's Lascarius for his colt. She was a beautiful little black mare by Albatross and a good mare. So I said, where are you selling him? He goes, how can I sell him? So he kept him, and he made 2.3 million or something, whatever he made, or $1.8 million or whatever it was.
Well, I think your fastest ride was in a time trial with Fondest.
Yeah.
And that was, how many years ago was that? And his record stood for like 30 years.
Yeah, just about. Yeah. It was 1993, I think. But I drove Fondest a couple times as a 3-year-old, and then Freddie's group bought him. Freddie Grant's group bought him as a 4-year-old, and he was probably 5 then. I drove him off and on a little bit. Walter Case drove him. Wally drove him. John drove him. Whoever Freddie could get wherever he was at, and he traveled around the circuit. And I hadn't driven for a long time, and they wanted to time trial him at Springfield. And Walter had been driving him. I don't know. Anyway, he didn't want to go. Wally, I don't know who they asked, but anyway, they called me, and I said, yeah, sure, I'll go. So I went out to time trial him, and it wasn't the best day. It was probably 75 degrees, a little bit of a wind, and it really gets hot out there, and it just wasn't one of those days. And so I had read, right, wrong, or indifferent, I read about when does a person, an athlete's metabolism peak? The peak hours are between 2 and 4 in the afternoon. So we're going to do it in the afternoon. I said, oh, that's good, like that. Maybe it'll help, who knows. So it was windy, and Freddie warned him up an extra trip. We're going to go at 3 o'clock, so now it's like 20 to 4, and Fred, we got to get going. I never told him that at the time. I just want to see maybe that would work. Whether it did or not, who knows, but we went at 10 to 4. So I'm going on the track with him, and Freddie, he was nervous, and a lot of stress on him and stuff, and he said, listen, he said, if it's too windy, he said, bring him back. Don't go with him. I go, Fred, I did 5,000 miles to score him down. We're going. So anyway, it worked out good.
Yeah, and Freddie was Freddie Grant, who is still in business today, and still has a nice little stable and doing some good as well.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the next one is going to lead into a couple questions. Annihilator and Billy Houghton.
Well, I don't know how that came about. There's lots of rumors and stories, but I can tell you what Dottie told me, Dottie Houghton, that what happened was they had 6 eliminations for the Woodrow Wilson. The top 2 were going back in the final for a couple million the next week. So Saturday night, I was going to Springfield to race, and the Fancy Crown, the Grand Circuit was out there. So Billy said to me, he said, I drove about 5 of his in elimination, never got 1 qualified. And he got Annihilator and Persian Square qualified. So Tommy Houghton was driving him, and Billy drove Annihilator. So he said, don't take a drive in the Wilson. He said, I'm going to put you down to drive Annihilator.
This was Saturday night?
Saturday night, 5, 6 days before. I said, why? He said, well, the weather forecast is raining. He said, he had a cataract in one eye, he said, and he said, you know what? I'm 63 years old. He said, you guys are just a little step ahead of me, which is sad to hear a man like him say, but anyway, I know the feeling later on in my life, but we went out to Springfield and we raced, and Tommy and I were staying together. We came back after racing in the afternoon, and Tommy called home to let him know how he was doing, and he said, is Billy there? And he said, yeah. He put me on. He said, I put you down to drive that horse tomorrow. I said, you crazy? He goes, just make it home safe, he said. So that's how it came about, and I warmed the horse up that night, the last trip, and asked him about it. He told me all about him, and he said he acts like he's all done, but he's not. I mean, obviously he wasn't, and he went on to win. So it was funny that in the winner's circle later that night, one of Leon had looked after Persian Square said to Billy, he said, why didn't you drive him, Bill? So, Billy in his wit, he goes, Leon, if I thought he was that good, I would have. Which is not true, because he told me this is the greatest horse I ever trained. So then there was lots of rumors that the owners pressured him and this and that, and Dottie says no. I mean, and I believe her, that she just said he woke up like 2 in the morning and said, I'm going to put Billy down there and drive that horse. And she goes, you said this is the best horse you ever had. He goes, yeah. He said, but I don't want to hinder his chances. So. Quite a man to do that, right?
Yep. No, he was special. There's no question about that.
And I'm glad all the good drivers had one in there. He had to get to me. So
I think you would have been the pick anyway. Talk about his 3-year-old year and the 49-mile on Hambletonian Day.
Well, afternoon, like Billy Houghton always said this, stone dust racetracks are not daytime racetracks. They're better at night because they hold water better at night with no sun. It's like everywhere in the daytime. The other day here at the Meadowlands, there was 2 water trucks going after every race.
Fast too.
Fast to get the whole track done right, and they did a good job. And that day the track was wet, and I mean it was stuff like that, but it's just just not the same for a horse like to go that fast. He'd have been better at night. And Falcon Seal Street, he got right on his back, and I thought maybe he was going to go by me there at one point, but it worked out okay. That was a big mile, back then, but he had won the Meadowlands Pace in 150 in the last 2 quarters and 27 flat, which was unheard of back in those days.
Sure.
So, but
what about the jug that year?
Well, there was they didn't want to go to the jug, half-mile track and all that kind of stuff, so I got a call from a guy that was one of the harness riders that said if he doesn't go to the jug, he might not be horse of the year. So anyway, the breeders they all wanted to go, and there was some kind of hesitancy not to go, so they went, and luckily it turned out he won, because Persian Square was awful good that day, and Billy was prepping him for the jug, and Annihilators that ended up winning. And that was after he was out west and he wasn't so sound his feet and all that kind of stuff, but he come back, he bounced back. That was a sign of a great horse, but he went through a real bad spell for a month, and they brought him home, and whatever they did to him, away he went again, so he was good.
And your relationship from that point on with Billy Houghton?
Yeah, I drove a lot of horses for him after that. He got killed the next year, just a year later. Napolitano was a 2-year-old that year, and we were baby racing colts, and he goes, I only got one good horse, one good 2-year-old trotter, him. But he'd shown nothing as a 2-year-old, nothing. I think he won 1 race out west, maybe a late closer or something, then come back as a 3-year-old, and 4-year-old, 5-year-old, and what a great horse he was. So great eye for a horse.
Greatest horseman ever?
In my opinion, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. But there was a lot of mine never was that close to, like Stanley I was never close to, but with Houghton, driving for him and baby racing horses for him, and even he bought me a colt one time, and I thought he was a little small, and he goes, no, he said he's going to be fine. He said he's got lots of bone density to him and stuff, so all right, I'll take that. His name was Gunship. He made $300,000 or $400,000, I think, so it was a lifetime. So great eye for a horse, great eye. Knew what he was looking for, and he'd buy all kinds, all breeds, different looks, but he knew what he was looking at.
Let's fast forward now to today's racing, and any theories why horses, or so many horses, can go so fast now?
Our breed, it's only 120 years old. Thoroughbreds are around 400 years. So they would have to be better, right? I mean, they bred and get them better to what they are today, like that.
When they plateau.
Yeah, and they plateaued. I think I read a book one time that said that in 1948, when Citation set the world record for a mile, 132, there was a lot of breakdowns. So they dug the tracks up. There were 2 inches of cushion and maybe 3 and 4. So that would naturally slow them down, I guess, going through that deeper stuff. But our horses, the difference of a look, and you know that from when you were training horses, the threefold. What would he look like today? You know, something you'd see at the fairs, right? I mean, they're short-legged, they're short-coupled, they have short necks, big heads. They're different now. You look at them now; they're gorgeous. Look at that beach class and those horses. They're just different looking, right? Stride, bigger horse obviously takes fewer steps to go a mile, right? So you never take a fat man or a little guy to a foot race, right? So you get a big guy to do that. So, but in you know that the racetracks are not better. Believe me, they're worse than. They'll say, "Oh, the track's this and that." Yeah, sure. They make them as hard as this table, which is very detrimental to a horse's soundness and health and welfare, in my opinion. But we can do that for 6 hours if you want. But anyway, the people that are track people, not saying the Meadowlands, they have little respect for experience. I've got 60 years experience. John Campbell's got 60 or 50, close to it again, and our opinion don't mean anything. It's sad that you can't sit down with a track management and take you to a track man and say, here's what we wanted. At the Meadowlands, when the track was bad, years ago when they had limestone, and when Bob first came to work here, we met with them every night, and the track was bad, the material was bad, and not much Bob could do about that.
That's Bob Ashelman.
Yeah, Bob Ashelman from does the track here. So anyway, Joe just said, listen, Bob, he said, if they want an inch of cushion or foot, give it to them. If it's wrong, they're wrong. Why wouldn't other people do that too, right? When you go and you go see some trackman and ask them to do something, it seems like they do the exact opposite because you ask them. Maybe they hear too many opinions, but that shouldn't be the point of it. Whoever's a track, representative there for the horseman, listen to him. If he's wrong, get rid of him. Get another guy. If I'm wrong and I do that, get rid of me. Very simple. Here's the keys to the house here. Take it. Let somebody else do it. So anyway, that's a part of it. So that's a rant. Anyway, the horses, they're bigger, they're faster. We raise them better. Feed is better. I mean, people zero in on that stuff. You go to a feed store, we used to buy oats and only. That was it. Corn. Go now. They got 50. I'm a Purina guy. I bought from Purina all the time. They got great feed. Great feed. You feed it. Some people like molasses. Some people don't. I like licorice in the feed, the pellet. And, seems to help a horse's stomach. It's supposed to be good for your stomach. Another thing, medication, veterinarian studies they do lameness-wise, how to get them sounded up, shockwave, and all the things that they do now. It's inject and PRP when they take the plasma and put
protein,
and stuff like that. Acids, you got polyglycan, you got all kinds of stuff like that. To help them create joint fluid and stuff like that. So all of it.
Yeah.
Drivers are better, maybe. I know these guys.
What do you think of race bikes? Are they detrimental to the sport being so long? I mean, or
about the same time the race bikes come up to what they are today is when we took away the whipping. And I think, me personally, and believe me, I was as guilty as anybody for using the whip a lot, maybe on some horses. I'm a firm believer that races are going faster because those horses are not getting hit with a whip. You're tapping them now. You're not hurting them. You're not cutting them and stuff like that. And you watch the races. Those horses, you get the slow motion. Those horses' ears are up down by the wire. Go back 15 years and do the same thing. Their ears are right on their neck, and they know what's coming. Mm-hmm. They don't know it anymore. And the drivers, all these young guys, and I said when Scott Zirin and Doug McNair first started driving, there no whip for them, right? I mean, not like we did, like one-handed and stuff. Let's call it that. They can really make a horse go with their hands. That Scott Zirin never moves on a horse. And now you got Todd, Andrew, Dexter. I mean, those guys are tremendous. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't want to race against them. I know that. And not only can they make a horse go, they don't make many mistakes. Those guys. Mm-hmm. And that was always my uncle used to say, don't screw up, let somebody else screw up. So and it would happen a lot too, right? People would screw up. So they're professional drivers. That's, well, all that comes about. So that helps horses, I think.
The race bikes themselves being so much longer and the way the guys sit in a race bike, I mean, do you think that's creating a lot of why today's races are so much speed oriented and horses winning more on the front end than horses coming from behind?
I would say it would have to be, but in order to really do a test on that, put them back in the old bikes and let them race for 6 months in the old, we're looking at one right there, beautiful bike, right? I mean, it was just like sitting home in your easy boy chair. Now those bikes, and those guys, they get used to it. I mean, they don't know any better. They've never been in one of these, but they all wear back braces and stuff that you're laying back, and the reason they're laying back because the bikes get such a lift to them too, right? They're not sitting like this.
You
bike
almost can't sit up in them.
You can't. No, it's hard, difficult. So anyway, yeah, I don't know the race bikes. Maybe the wheels. The wheels are better. I mean, I can take the old wheels that were on that Parker with the Parker hubs and a new wheel, and I've done it with 2 of them and spin them. Come back in 10 minutes, and that one still spins. So. But.
So you mentioned a lot of drivers. So if you owned a horse today and was racing at the Meadowlands, and you had your pick, who are you putting up to drive?
I've had a horse at the Meadowlands last year, a horse called Colossal Stride A, and well, Nifty had him. I mean, we own a small piece of him. And Dexter Dunn was he's, to me, I said, you watch him drive sometimes, you're like, he's trying to lose, but he wins. he just sits out there with them, and he don't hurt them, and he's cool, and he's tremendous. Like that horse of ours, he won a couple opens here at the Meadowlands a year ago last winter, and he made 130-some thousand or something. One of our guys there wasn't too happy with his drives because he's first up all the time, and so we got to get Dexter off that horse. I go, everybody in North America wants him. You want rid of him? Are you crazy? So, but to each his own, right?
Yeah. So now that you're visiting the States, but back home in Canada, how has the industry in Canada rebounded from COVID? Still is rebounding, I assume.
Yeah. The handle has gone up considerably. A lot of simulcast is foreign wagering, you call it, and it's mostly from the United States. And they're in charge of all the wagering in Canada, or especially Ontario, but the HPI, they own that. And they've done a lot of marketing to get more and more handle. It's working. I mean, they're betting lots, but we're on subsidy. We get X amount of dollars per year for racing. So that was okay 10 years, 12 years ago, whatever, 10 years ago we got it. But now move forward 10 years, expenses. Gasoline's $1.80 a liter up there. That's $8 a gallon. That's what we pay up there for, right? So, and housing has gone completely nuts here until just the last couple of months. My house, I bought a townhouse when I sold my farm 10 years ago, or 11, whatever it was. I paid $340,000 for it. Guy across the street sold his for $998. Same thing. It's the same thing. Only mine's better because I'm backed up to a park. He's backed up to a street. It's just a cul-de-sac. But that's come and gone now with the interest rates are raising. Now there's another thing. You got interest rates going up now. What's going to happen to these people that paid $700,000, $800,000, $900,000 with these houses? And you only get 5-year mortgages up there, not 15 or 20 or 25. So anyway, how's it doing? Horse shortage. A lot of people got into the breeding business. People keep horses now a lot more. People just do it as a hobby, I think. And trainers that had 25 have 5. So how's it doing? Not good. Not really good.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah.
So just want to go over a couple of horses that we didn't mention that were all Breeders' Crown winners you had. Some names that people might not be familiar with. A nice little trotter, Abundance, for the Duchamp family.
I only drove him twice. That was the only time I ever drove him. I drove him in elimination. I drove him in the final because Sonny Patterson drove him and he had a giant hit or something in there that won a pair of Ericssons that he had to drive.
And Jeff Spice.
I drove her, I think I started driving her, I can't remember when, maybe in the Breeders' Crown. And she's a nice mare, and she got sold right after Breeders' Crown, went to Italy, I think, or Sweden or someplace. Nice mare.
Umbro Devona, another nice trotting filly.
Great mare. Not sound, but a great mare. Great mare. Terrible attitude, terrible. You couldn't ever
Staying together as an aged horse.
Great horse, great, tough, just a great horse. I mean, he raced everywhere. The half-mile track, 5/8, the 7/8 mile track. It didn't matter to him. He just a good horse. If you could get him in the right spot, he's just one of those horses that there's a few trainers that can do that have horses that I don't know how they make them instill that desire into them the last quarter. And Bob McIntosh is one of those guys, and there's a few guys like that. And that horse, when he won here the American Pace Championship that day, I got away 9th with him. But what could I do? I had a bad spot, and what are you going to do? And he won. I mean, he mowed him down and won 50 or 49 apiece that day. Come from last. He could do it any which way.
So you retired a few years ago. So what was the deciding factor in when you decided to retire from driving?
I just felt I wasn't as good as I was when I was younger. I could feel it kind of slipping away. I mean, I could drive a horse. I could get him in the right spot, but I just couldn't make them go like I could. I always said I can get them right to the color board, the toe board, but I can't get them the rest that way. And that was when it counts a lot of times, right? So like Jack Hope said there one time, I was about 60, I think, or 62 or 3, and they were interviewing and said, "What do you think of drivers today?" He said, "Well, I think that all drivers should retire when they're 60 years old." So I don't know, it was Ken Middleton or whoever was interviewing said, "Well, we got, Ronnie Waves and Bill O'Donnell still driving." He said, "My point."
So Billy, I mean, we appreciate you taking the time to do this. Is there anything else you'd like to discuss, or any other horses, people that you want to make mention of?
No, just, I mean, like I said, when I got started, when I came from, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was working for, Webby's, and I had the opportunity to go to electrician's trade school, and I signed up, and I was going to go like that fall. I was going to go the next year, and because they were full. So when I went to States, I said, how long is this good for, this application? 3 years. So after 3 years, I was packed up and ready to go home. I was going to go to school that fall, go back and take a trade. I would have killed myself with electricity for sure, but anyway, I'm still here because I didn't go. But just that, I was all packed up, ready to go. It was the 1st of May. I was going to go home for the summer, work for my uncle, and then go to school. And these people come by, Mr. and Mrs. Gray, and want to know if I train their horses. So I said, well, I'll try for the summer. And here I am. I'm still here. So anyway, yeah. So I didn't know what I wanted to do, but anyway, I knew I loved the horses, and people thought I got along better with horses than I did. I never really thought that I was that good at it, to be honest with you. I never had the confidence to do it. Like Jimmy was the one that forced me to drive, and he said years later when I was at the Meadowlands, he said, Bill, I said, I always knew you'd do good, but he said, you're getting a little ridiculous now. So anyway, that was just Jim, but no, he forced me to. Like he'd go, no, you drive him. And he was supposed to drive a horse, and I'd only driven like 3 times the travel boy was training for him. I mean, and he sent the owner over to me, and he said, well, put yourself down. He said, my horses are sick. He said, they might have to scratch him, and he did. He had to scratch his horse, but the judges wouldn't let him change because he was on the program. So I go, what am I going to do? He goes, you'll be fine. So he won. So then I just kept driving after that. Mm-hmm. And there's, and once you win a race or two, you know what it's like. It's the greatest high in the world. I'm not a drug guy, but I'm sure that when I cross that wire and you won, there's no better feeling than that. And I don't care if it's Marshfield Fair, Massachusetts, or it's at the Meadowlands or Breeders' Crown. They're all the same. Yep. When you give it that adrenaline rush.
We just had the Hall of Fame dinner a couple weeks ago, and Ronnie Burke was inducted in the Hall of Fame, and in his speech he said, I just love to win. I don't care if it's a 5,000 claimer or if it's the Meadowlands Pace.
Yeah.
It's just that feeling of elation that comes with winning any kind of race.
Yeah, absolutely. Trot, pace, it don't matter. I mean, it wouldn't matter when I was a kid. We used to race bareback through the field. you always wanted to win, and then we'd get 3 or 4 horses go down the field through the path, and all came to a path. You had to be the first one to that path, or you had to pull up, and because it was all swampy. But that was always if you stayed on.
If you stayed on. Okay, so Bill, again, thank you very much for your time. I'm sure we could go on for hours.
Yeah, for sure.
But
we have.
I know you have some travel plans, so again, appreciate you taking the time, and that's a wrap for this year's edition of Cracker Barrel. I'm Mark Loewe, and thank you again for joining us.
And this, you guys have done a beautiful job since the last few years here, just keeping on top of things, right, changing things and stuff, right. Mm-hmm. Poor Gail, when she was here, I mean, she started with nuts and bolts. Really, I mean, and you get to a point you have to move it on to somebody else, I think, too, right? You just,
John's been here now 10 years.
10 years, huh?